Doctors and nurses of Reddit, have you ever witnessed a couple have a child that was obviously not the father's? If so, what happened? Not a doctor/nurse, but my ex-girlfriend delivered a baby while I was in the delivery room, and turns out it wasn't mine. She was 16, I was 15. All along I was under the impression that this kid was mine, and time to be an adult. Took all the classes, read the books, worked every night/weekend to save whatever money I could as a 15-year-old. I finally get the call she is in labor, so I have somebody rush me to the ER. Luckily for her, it wasn't a long labor, only about 6 hours, but there was a complication. The baby came out with the umbilical cord wrapped around its neck. Doctor assured us it was going to be okay, but the nurses were prepping for things to go south. Baby comes out, it's a light shade of purple, and the nurses immediately take the baby and put on the smallest mask you have ever saw to help it get oxygen, I guess. I was too panicked to ask a lot of questions. They state they need to keep the baby on watch overnight, so I stay in the room with the ex. The next evening, baby is back in the room with us, and all seems well. The ex is asleep, and the same nurse from the night before comes into the room and beckons me out. She states that at risk of her losing her job, she has to break some harsh news to me. That kid is not mine. She stated that, while at this stage it wasn't obvious, over the next few weeks it would become clear this kid was mixed, and since both of us were white, it was a high probability that it wasn't mine. Q a mixed bag of emotions, and me promptly waking the ex to get a little clarification. Come to find out, she knew the chances, and was just hoping it was mine, because it worked better for her. Apparently her father was old school racist and she didn't want to have to deal with that. I left the hospital to collect my thoughts, and a few weeks later was served with child support papers, one DNA test, and about 6 weeks later, I'm 0.0% that kid's father wherever that nurse is now. I hope your life is amazing. I understand that you were not supposed to get involved in the personal side of things and keep it professional, but you saved me a lot of additional headache. I used to work with a guy whose wife was pregnant. Near time for delivery, everyone at our place of business had a big party with gifts, money, etc. So big day comes, water breaks, they get in car to go to hospital. She breaks the news on the way there. It's not his, the kid is another race, and if he could just drop her off at the hospital and then leave, that would be great. He took a few days off work, found a new apartment, moved out, filed divorce, etc. He called into work and told someone what happened. News spread pretty fast. All congratulations cards, etc. were cleaned up and thrown away. Everyone was very sensitive to his pain. Except, somehow, I don't know how, I did not get the news. So on his first day back, I walked into the office he shared with 6 to 7 other guys and said, hey daddy-o, how's fatherhood so far? Getting any sleep? Got some pictures? Let's see the little tyke. He slowly lifted his head to look at me with a painful look. The room was dead silent. One of his workmates stood up, grabbed my arm, and walked me out of the room, shushing me. What happened? I asked. Did it die? What's the problem? When he told me I about died myself. I still feel bad for the dude, and it's been 30 years. I'm a nurse working in labor and delivery. Most of the time, if the mom thinks the baby may not be her boyfriend/husband, they will just have their friend/sister/mom with them there for the delivery and have the dad come to the hospital/room after seeing the baby. No guarantees because babies can change a lot over a couple weeks. Many African American babies have very light skin when they are born, and it gets darker. I have had a PT's husband get upset about the baby being too light. They were both black until his mom smacked him and told him that's what he looked like when he was born. Recently I had something I thought was interesting happen. Girl comes in labor with her boyfriend, sister and a friend. Boyfriend doesn't seem too engaged during the process, but that's not uncommon. Baby is born and is fine. Sister sends dad to get some stuff. Note here, all people involved are Hispanic and only speak Spanish. My specific medical Spanish is pretty decent, and I can get you through an epidural or delivery. Most things that come up pretty well, but I'm not fluent. So as soon as the dad leaves, the sister is like, I have a question for you, and then process to say something I can't understand at all. I try to clarify, but I'm just not getting it. I offer to go get the translator. She's like, no, I don't want it to be official. She whips out her phone and through Google Translate asks, how can we get a paternity test in the hospital? I then have to explain that we really don't do that, but you can get one at CVS. They tell me that the baby doesn't look like the other child of this mom and this guy, and that it might be someone else's, but they wanna check before telling him. So I just apologize and tell them how they can get a DNA test at CVS, and they're like $50. This isn't the first time I've been asked about paternity testing, just had no idea how you say it in Spanish. Edit. Thank you to all the people telling me how to say paternity test in Spanish. I appreciate the effort and will try to remember it, but I also have Google Translate. I just didn't recognize / understand the words at the time she was asking me, which is why I offered to get a translator. It's not generally accepted for nurses to use their phones to translate at work. Also, yes, you can get a DNA test at CVS. I believe someone in the comments has posted a link. You can also get a DNA test done at a clinic, but it generally costs more. The first time the paternity test thing came up, I asked my manager, who said to refer them to CVS, which is what I have heard other nurses do as well. Some hospitals used to offer paternity testing, but many no longer do, because it is not usually seen as medically necessary, and as such usually isn't covered by Medicaid or insurance, so the hospital ends up eating the cost. I'm not saying that there are no hospitals that still do paternity testing, just that it is not the case at any of the hospitals I have worked at in my area. You don't know anyone else's life circumstances, so it is best to reserve judgment about the choices they have made, or you think they may have made, because not every situation is cut and dry. Plenty of biological fathers leave and do not support their children. Women are not all lying villains. Life is very grey, just treat people with respect and compassion. I had a test done on my son when he was about 7 months old. Baby mama constantly told me he wasn't mine, but then came after me for child support. Got the test done, and he was mine. So I hired a lawyer, and we sat and chilled. 4 months later, she's arrested on charges of distribution of meth, where my son lived, and he's been with me for the last 8 years now. She pays me. CS edit. I was remembering events wrong here. I got my kid when he was 11 months old after DHS did a random stop/drug test on her, and she failed for meth. I then started a 2-year battle in juvenile court to not allow the state to reunify with the mother. I finally got juvenile court to release my case to district court, where we fought for actual custody. During our district court battle, she took my son for a visit, and I got a call from the cops in a city an hour away that she had been arrested on a domestic with her boyfriend at a hotel, and they searched her and found needles and meth paraphernalia. That was the last time she had him unsupervised. We went about 2 years of her barely calling, seeing him once a month for 10 to 20 minutes, until she finally got arrested on attempt to distribute meth charges. She got out on bail and was arrested for it again 3 weeks later. She spent 3 years in state prison and has been out about 8 months now. She appears to be clean and just gave me $100 for extra child support yesterday. She's only court appointed to pay $52 a month, so we are giving her a shot, but she is still and will remain on supervised visits for a long time. The whole fiasco has been such a blur, it's hard to remember exactly when, what, where happened, especially after 4 to 5 years of really not having to deal with her at the time. It was utter shit though. She punched me a couple times, lied under oath, sent me threats, inappropriate photos of her with other men, the list goes on and on. I've really tried to put a lot of it behind me and forget about as much of it as I can to try and help me forgive her, so she can at least be somewhat a part of my kid's life, because that's what he wants. I just watch her like a hawk now. Not a doctor, but a distant cousin of mine definitely has children that don't belong to the father. My cousin was adopted as an infant and was essentially a crack baby. She struggled with some developmental issues and has a low IQ compared to most, but can still live on her own with little to no issues. She, a white woman, married a Latino guy, really dark brown skin, several years ago, and they had a son together who has dark hair, dark skin, and dark eyes. He is easily identified as their son. The real trouble happens years later. Her husband, who we'll call Javier, has some IQ issues of his own. Just a little slow when it comes to tasks and reasoning. Anyway, Javier is in the military and gets deployed internationally for about 6 months. When he comes home, his wife is 4 months pregnant. You do the math. He still believes the baby is his own, even after it's born with pale skin and blonde hair, blue eyes. If that wasn't bad enough, it happens again 2 years later with another baby. Same blonde hair and blue eyes. Everyone knows she slept with a different man. It was actually her high school boyfriend, but Javier still thinks the children are his. It's kind of sad, but at this point there's not much you can do. He has raised the kids as his own. Neither a doctor or nurse, but a good friend of mine was out of the country on emergency with his work and I ended up bringing his wife to the airport. My friend and I are, even still, best friends and all of us went to high school together, and I had no idea his wife was unfaithful. However, I was in the delivery room as she didn't want to be W/O anyone. Their point baby came out, straight up Asian. I knew, the odd knew. I just walked out the room then. All I could hear her wailing, saying her marriage is over, and the nurses quickly picked up on why she was crying. I called him and told him the news. He explained to his work that a true emergency was at home, so they chartered him a flight home. Saudi Aramco high class action, and he filed for divorce right then and there. Point during the divorce, out of their 3 kids, 0 was my friend's. It didn't just mess my friend up, it messed the kids up as well, because they knew him as daddy. The court tried to make my friend pay support for those kids who weren't his, because they became accustomed to it, and the dad abandonment was borderline criminal. He had 0 biological attachment. Point family courts are so biased against men. My friend spent a fortune fighting it out of principle and eventually won. It emotionally ruined him, and now he doesn't trust women. He won't go on dates or anything because of it. I can't say I blame him, but that is beyond faked up. Obligatory, not a nurse or doctor. My brother told me this story about a man he used to work with. Point brother's work friend is from Eastern European country and came to USA many moons ago and started his family here. One of his sons meets a nice girl. They plan to get married, but life happens and then more life ends up coming out of them. Whole big family is excited about new baby. Father to be is absolutely ecstatic. They have a small ceremony before baby is born. Yada yada. Delivery time comes, and out pops this little boy who is about 50 shades darker than either parent, and new dad absolutely loses his shit. In his heartbroken rage, he accuses his new bride of cheating on him, disowns said child and rages right out of the delivery room, leaving new mom all alone with her mountain of shame. Point this guy returns to his family and continues his hate-filled rampage and exclaims to his family that his hoe of a wife had cheated on him because the baby looked nothing like him in skin tone. The family is shocked. Never would have believed this sweet young thing would do that to their son. Absolute shame and misery all around. Point well, sitting in a dark little corner of the room, little tiny grandma chirps up and has a story to tell. Point apparently, back in her glory days, during some war or another, she had a great summer with a French soldier, a black French soldier. She got knocked up, and he got sent home, and back then you kept the baby and hoped your family didn't murder you before you could abandon it somewhere. She ended up meeting her husband shortly after getting knocked up, and things just progressed as if it was his child, and wouldn't you know, the little thing popped out white as snow and she breathed a sigh of relief, because this was going to be the easiest lie to keep ever. So this poor bastard has been carrying around this super melanin gene his whole life and knocked up his wife, and it decided to all come out on his sweet little boy who he now has to go crawling back and reclaim. Point thankfully, the whole family went with him to the hospital. Old grandma had a picture of her old fella as proof, and husband and wife were reunited. Not a medical professional, but I know of a related court case that made it to the state's highest court. Black guy and white woman are married. She is a former prostitute, and at some point they separate. He moves out of state, she moves out of state, and she goes back to prostituting. Guy gets a phone call around 9 months later from a friend/relative of his ex saying that his ex is pregnant and ready to give birth any day now. Guy drives across the country so he could be there for the delivery. Baby comes out and is white, has blue eyes, and red hair. Mom says it must be a Trix baby. Seeing as the guy's black, he understandably pieces out. Later on, the mom's parental rights are terminated. As you can imagine from the prostituting, she was not a fit mother, and the state went about trying to find the dad to be notified before the kid can be adopted. Since the dude was still her husband at the time the child was born, legally he was the presumptive father. The state does genetic testing, and turns out he is the father. For an extra kick in the pants, the state ends up terminating his parental rights for abandonment. Not a happy ending. I worked labor and delivery. Had a very young mother come in, accompanied by her parents. She was just 12 to 13 and parents looked stuffy and kept telling her she'd had an abortion, she was too young, etc. Her mother was silent the whole time, but leaked tears for her constantly. While she labored, I received a call from a very young boy who said he was her boyfriend. His trembly voice explained that her father wouldn't come to the hospital. I explained that I couldn't give out information, but he could talk to her afterward. I went in, told her he had called, and she showed me a picture of him. He was white, straight red hair, pimply and tiny, the runt of the litter. About an hour later, her phys ed teacher stopped by to check on her, which I thought was odd. We didn't get many teachers checking on students. He was as opposite of the boyfriend as he could get. Tall, very muscular, beautiful smile, and rich, chocolate brown skin. The girl's father accompanied her to the delivery room. Odd, but okay. The more she pushed, the louder she cried. In between, she kept say sorry daddy. Finally, out slid a very beautiful, chocolate brown baby boy. I thought her father was going to pass the fuck out on my delivery room floor. I did my usual "it's a boy" and said nothing else. I handed him off to a nursery nurse and got out a chair. The new mom said "I'm sorry daddy" over and over again. Her mom, now frowned up, came to see the baby, took one look, started asking God for forgiveness, and left. I sent her dad home a short bit later, admonishing him to react at home, not here. I set up a time for our counselor to meet with him before I left. After talking to new mom, she admitted her gym teacher had been giving her special treatment. I explained such to her, and she said she'd only kissed the BFF, but had stayed after school to be with her gym teacher. I'm state mandated to report child abuse, so I did. 2 weeks later, with her world shattered, her baby was given up for adoption. I wish her the best. Of note, this was 1989. Oh boy, I'm the illegitimate baby in this one. So apparently my mom and dad were on a break, so she had a one-night stand with a dude she just met at a party. Later she tells my dad that she's pregnant with his kid, so they get back together so he can support her. I was born pretty dark because my bio dad was very Native American. The nurses made comments about me being a dark baby, but I guess dad attributed it to the bit of native in my mom, even though she's very pale skinned. Anyway, this being Oklahoma, of course my dad marries her to do the right thing. I was adopted by him after the wedding at about 10 months old. A month later my brother was born, definitely my dad's kid, and not long after that they had a fight, and she drops the revelation on him that I wasn't his. No idea why it wasn't more obvious, or was he in denial? Both my brothers are red-headed, light-eyed, and pale-skinned with freckles. I popped out the womb with dark hair, dark skin, dark eyes, no freckles. Even the nurses were like, what a cute Indian, Native American, baby. But during the divorce, when he had known the truth for a few years, he fought for me, along with my brothers, and eventually got custody of all of us. He planned on never telling me, but eventually my mom's loud-mouthed, complete piece of shit sister decided to let me know during an argument to be petty. That was probably the first time I really saw my dad cry. He's had periods of not being the best dad, but overall I ended up getting all my most defining traits from him. His commitment to a decision, his maniac work ethic, which was how he showed love, and his strength to keep moving forward despite constantly getting faked by any woman he trusts. I think he's done looking for love. It makes me sad, because he really deserves it. Maybe if my mom had been a better person he would have had a chance at that. He did get remarried, but the only thing worse than a shitty mom is an evil, narcissistic stepmother. Not the exact story you're looking for, but I'm a med-surg nurse. I had an older male patient who was in for anemia with critically low hemoglobin levels, receiving a few units of blood. I'd been taking care of him the last couple of days, and his daughter was visiting at the time with the patient's wife and him. We had to do our 2-nurse identification process for the blood, where we go over the name, ID numbers, and blood type for confirmation, before hanging it on the patient. When we were going through it, the daughter stops us and asks us what blood type we just said. I didn't really understand why at the time, but I told her again, and she got really concerned we may be hanging the wrong blood. She said that couldn't be right, because she was an anatomy professor, and there was no way the cross match could be right, because she was AB, and she knew her mom had blood type A, so her dad couldn't possibly be A either. I didn't think much of it, and went back to the doctor to ask him for another cross match, and he was like, oh, yeah, she might not be his daughter then. We ordered another cross match, and sure enough it came back as an A blood type. She just sat in the corner really quiet the rest of the day with a really sad look on her face. Her mom and dad didn't really get what was going on, but I know she had some idea. Kinda happened to my mom. My biological father is Greek with very pale skin and my mom is a white Western European mutt. When I was born I had very dark skin and a full head of thick black hair. He didn't seem concerned, but his mother freaked out, called my mother and grandmother not so nice names, and left. My father ended up splitting on us when I was about 3 weeks old with no explanation. A couple months later my skin lightened, all of my black hair fell, turns out he was the father. We've never tried to reach back out to his family, because in that first year of my life they went through a lot of drama including arrests, rehab stays, drive-by shootings, an affair followed by a divorce, another baby mama my mother didn't know about. The list goes on. My father and I tried to form a relationship when I was in high school. It went okay at first, and then he got weird very quickly. He insisted I called him dad, insisted on regular visitation, routinely showed up at my friends' and boyfriends' houses causing a scene, insisted I get family pictures with his new lady and his 5 other kids. None of us have the same mother, and this is not including the baby he had, and ditched before he got together with my mom. I regret ever trying at all. He and his family were and are still trashy hot messes, and I'm glad my family decided to keep me away from them. Cherry on top. He was working for my now husband's parents when my husband and I first met. Once his parents found out who he was and what had happened, they fired him, so I would never have to run into him at their business. He had it coming anyway, so we glad to finally stop making excuses for him and let him go. Late to the part here. My cousin was an obstetrics nurse in a Central European country. 2 women were in the maternity ward. Sadly, one lady had delivered a stillborn baby and was terribly upset. She told my cousin she and her husband had been trying for a baby for many years without success. She had difficulty conceiving, and they had a couple of miscarriages. She and her husband were overjoyed to carry a baby to term. The husband was not present in the ward that day, but the lady said he would be devastated to find out there was no baby. The other lady delivered a healthy baby, but was also upset. They were poor and already had 4 children at home. Their finances were stretched. She did not want to look after yet another baby. Her husband was very upset she was pregnant again. Not that he was blameless, but that's a different story. He was at work and was not at the hospital that day. My cousin talked to the other nurses. No paperwork had been completed, so the staff put both women in the same room with the one healthy baby and suggested they may want to talk. 40 minutes later, the lady without a child was holding the healthy baby. Both women looked happy and relieved. Few words were spoken, but the paperwork was written up by the staff to reverse the records of the 2 births. The lady who suffered a stillbirth went home with the baby she wanted, and the other lady returned, relieved, to her home. And the 4 other kids, they were of the same ethnic background and had similar features, so the swap probably went undetected. Throwaway for reason. Not a doc or nurse, but I'm the dad. Loved my wife and the baby, even when he wasn't born yet. Delivery went well, and they were getting ready to be discharged after some instructions. Nurse says the baby needs a lot of sunlight because he has a slight jaundice. Jaundice because my wife is blood type O. The kid has blood type A, which the nurse assumed was my blood type. No. I always believed I was O type 2. My siblings are all O. I tell this to the nurse and things became awkward. Nurse was stammering and took back the discharge paper saying she needs to recheck something and went out. I could not look directly at my wife. She's just completely confused. I just wanted to get out of there. Nurse returns and wanted us to get our blood tested down the hall. I just said okay, clamped up. My wasn't talking either. Went and had our blood tested. I walked 2 steps behind my wife. On the way back I noticed the nurses whispering to each other, giving side glances at my wife. My wife was about to cry. I took pity on her and supported her walking while saying things will be okay. I did not believe what I said. Waiting for the result was one of the worst few minutes of my life. I knew I was type O. My wife was confirmed or to a few months back. The nurse returned with results and they said I was type A. I was sure they faked it just to get us out there and end the awkwardness. I went along with it. We went home. I got drunk a few hours later. My dad came and he was really angry I was getting drunk while my poor wife and son are still recovering. I cried when I told him the story. He slapped me so hard then told me he was type A too. I was so shocked and happy and drunk. Got retested on a different clinic and I'm 100% type A. My wife still brings this up for favors or just to mock me. I still love my wife and the kid is 5 years old now. I'm not a nurse, nor a doctor, but from the moment I was born to about a month and a half, my father thought I wasn't, as I'm the youngest of 6, and at least 10 years younger than the one that came before me. My father had a vasectomy shortly after #5 was born, so when my mom announced she was pregnant he was pretty concerned. He had an inkling that she was messing around with her boss at the time, so he's thinking I wasn't his. Once I came into this world, my father's fear of me not being his only spiked. I was tan with a head full of black hair, as opposed to my other siblings who were all born bald and much lighter. My father told me about all of this part, but said once my hair turned blonde and my legs were long as well as my height being above the normal percentile for children my age, he knew I was his. He's a very tall man. As for my sister, she had different information. She went on to work in the same fire department our dad worked in when I was born. My 13th birthday was rolling around and she was telling the other firefighters how excited she was and the gifts she was going to send me when one of the older guys piped up with, "Hey guys, remember when their dad found out Tyrant_avocado was his happiest day of his life?" My sister asked him to clarify and come to find out that my dad was very suspicious of me not being his, so he had a DNA test done behind my mom's back and got the results in at the station a few weeks later and found out I was in fact his child. He immediately ran into the station to announce to all of his buddies how it was the best day of his life. Yada yada. This is a secret my sister and I will take to our graves because I know it'd break the old man's heart if he knew I knew. I understand his concern at the time and I don't have any resentment toward him. My friend knew the baby wasn't his the moment he saw it. He's black. His now ex-wife is white with dark hair. His daughter had straight, fine blonde hair and was super light at birth. His daughter was born in the 70s and he said, "First people were staring me down, hating that I was a black man with a white wife. Then they were staring me down, thinking I must be dumb if I thought this kid was mine." Me, I was hurting because I had suspected my wife was cheating but decided if she'll let me, I'll still love this baby like she's mine. He told me, "Whenever it came up, I told my daughter that I'd loved her as long as she existed. Her skin color didn't matter." He said all the staff kept looking at him for reaction/response. He said he did have tears in his eyes when he saw the baby, but it was mostly relief that the baby, was okay because they'd had to do an emergency C-section and took a long time bringing the baby to them. Then staff kinda stayed near, expecting him to lash out in anger because he's a big dude and, at the time, was still in the army. He said, "Once I saw my daughter, I knew I didn't care what my ex-wife had done. I knew what I wanted to do was continue to be a dad to my daughter apostrophe." So he told his wife, if the biological dad of the baby wasn't interested, he'd still like to be her father, but that they'd be getting a divorce. She agreed to it, and he went on to have a baby with another woman, who unfortunately didn't accept his first daughter, especially because of not being biologically his, so that relationship dissolved. So there he was in the 80s, a single dad with a white daughter and a mixed daughter, as the mom of the second daughter left entirely, leaving the kid with him. Thankfully his second wife, with which he had 2 more kids, accepted both daughters as his/treated them like her own. Not a doctor, but this story fits. I worked in a steel mill for a decade. It was shift work, one crew replacing another every 8 hours one night. When we came in for midnight, someone that just left 3 to 11 shift called in and wanted to speak to, we'll call him John, voice on the phone. "Hey John, I just drove past your house on the way home. You may want to get home immediately." So we cover for him as he runs out the door and drives home. Small town, wasn't too far. So he gets home, and there's 3 cars in his driveway. He goes inside, and 3 guys from 3 to 11 are all banging his wife, while the kids are home. There were 4 kids, by the way. So obviously he starts going insane. He's trying to fight the guys. Everyone is scattering. The kids wake up. Police come, etc. The kicker is he had all the kids' DNA tested after this, as they were all under 8 years old. Finds out 3 of the 4 aren't his. He files for divorce. He is willing to be in their lives, but fights to not have to pay her support for the kids. He loses. Judge says it doesn't matter if she lied and conned you, and they aren't yours biologically. You've been supporting them and will continue to. He goes a few months and is a clearly broken man before deciding to end his life. There's never been a more clear realization of why domestic violence can happen for me. If anyone ever deserved it, she did. This guy was the nicest guy on the planet, and she never showed remorse for being the terrible human being she is. This didn't happen to me, but I thought it did. My wife and I were having our 3rd child, and our 2 others look exactly like me. Brown hair, brown eyes. My wife has brown hair and hazel eyes. Our 3rd daughter, on the other hand, has red hair and blue eyes. She was born by C-section, and I was in the room when she came out, and I swear to God on my life I thought she was an albino black kid. I told my wife she has red hair. My wife said, "No she doesn't." This went back and forth for a second until the doctor said from across the room, "She is definition a redhead." Now let me quantify this first. My wife and I are not exactly monogamous. We have other people in the bedroom from time to time, so the idea of the baby being someone else's, however minimal the chances, is a slim possibility. This is where the doubt comes in. She hadn't been with another guy to my knowledge for a long time before my wife got pregnant. And as far as I know, none of those guys had red hair. My wife isn't really attracted to redhead guys. We weren't with anyone else for going on over a year before the birth. So of course I started thinking maybe she was stepping out without telling me. Now in a relationship like ours, there isn't really a reason to lie to your spouse about faking someone else. We are cool with it, as long as we check with each other first, and it's strictly for fun and there are no feelings involved. So worry sets in a little bit when I think she could be hiding something from me. Because that could mean she's doing it for more than fun, which is always a risk when you open up your marriage like this. I let it go for a while, but by the time she was 2 her hair was still red, her eyes were still blue and getting lighter, so I had to put my mind at ease and do a paternity test. My wife has a lot of red hair in her family, and I have blue eyes in my family. And turns out, even though it's super rare to have 2 recessive genes skip generations, I'm her father. She's a little genetic anomaly. Red hair, blue eyes, no freckles, easily tans, and 100% mine. So I had to panic, but it all turned out well. I can contribute to a post. I'm an ultrasound tech in the military. Had a lady come in for what was supposed to be her first trimester U/S. She was there with her husband, and as I was scanning and talking with them, it came out that the husband had only just come back from his deployment. When I started the exam, I asked the mom when the first date of her last menstrual period was. This auto-generates gestational for the baby. The date of the LMP should have made the baby 9 to 10 weeks. This lined up with the dad's return from his deployment. As soon as I put the transducer down, I knew the baby wasn't 9 to 10 weeks. This changes the exam protocol, so I made an excuse to walk out and change it. I come back in, start scanning, and the first measurement put the baby at 22ish weeks. When you measure head or abdomen circumference, it puts the gestational age on the screen. The dad glimpsed it and asked what it was, and I said just some info on the baby. I did my best to block the view, and when they asked questions about the baby, I told them to speak with the OB document. I wasn't about to have them blow up and fight in the exam room. When they walked out, they were happy, not sure what happened in the OB's office. Not a doc or nurse, but one of my older brothers had a pretty shitty experience, and I had to step in and say something. After dating for about 5 months, his girlfriend tells him she's pregnant. He's not concerned at all and breaks the news to our family, who was very supportive. Well, about 2 months later we get a group text that she's going into labor, so we are obviously very worried about the baby being born so early. He's concerned too, but the baby comes out and is perfectly healthy, and he's totally oblivious that it's just not possible for this baby to be fully matured. Looking back, I'm sure he was just in shock and really hadn't had time to process everything, but nonetheless he didn't see any red flags at this point, but our entire family did. I reach out to our oldest brother because he happened to know the guy this gal dated before our brother. So my oldest bro reached out to this guy, who confirms that they had sex approximately 9 months prior. My oldest bro breaks this news to me, but isn't sure how to tell my brother. A day or two later I go to the hospital to visit brother, baby's mom, and baby, with all of this still very much at the front of my mind. And at this point some of us had talked to my brother about the fact that something is very off here. I'm sitting there in the hospital room with all 3 of them when the nurse comes in with the birth certificate asking for his signature. Out loud, in front of the nurse and mom, I tell my brother that he cannot sign that paper until a paternity test is done. The nurse, bless her heart for helping, immediately agrees and says that if there is any doubt as to who the dad is, he shouldn't sign it yet. Well, as you can imagine, it was not his baby. He was devastated and certainly embarrassed, but eternally grateful to me for being there when it all went down. The strangest part is that I had a customer cancel an appointment on me that day, which allowed me to get there earlier than I otherwise would have. I won't push religion on anyone, but it was one of the moments in my life that made me believe in a higher power. Not a doctor, but a nurse in Obgyn on an army base in the States. I witnessed a delivery recently where the female patient had been impregnated by her partner's best friend. In this case, however, the husband actually knew. It is a wild story, but I can't use any names. The 2 boys had grown up together in rural Tennessee and ultimately both went into the armed services. While in the army, the husband, not the biological father of the child, met the mother at a local event and fell in love. Later, the husband was deployed into combat and was involved in a botched mission and very sadly was presumed to be Kaya. In their mourning, the girlfriend and the best friend found solace in one another's company and started a serious relationship. As it turned out, however, the man was later discovered to have been a POW and later had his release negotiated by the states. He returned to find his former fiancée in the arms of his former best friend and, needless to say, was in shock and awe. Not only that, she was pregnant with his best friend's child. Just a few days later, the 2 men were deployed on another mission, this time together. Sadly, this mission also did not go to plan, and the 2 men found themselves pinned down by enemy soldiers. In the end, the biological father sacrificed his own life to save the husband and original love of his fiancée. When he returned home, the husband delivered the news to the woman patient and offered to raise the baby. Then the husband asked his stepson if he would like to go flying, and they flew off into the sunset in the old biplane that his father once had.